Okay, so this is how I remember the court cases, the required documents, and the amendments. So first, well, there's a couple court cases that I just like already know, like Marbury versus Madison. I already know is judicial review because we did it a lot in APUS. That's the first one. And the next one's McCulloch versus Maryland. And the way that I remember it is that the C in McCulloch, I think of cash and like think about how the National Bank of the U.S. Like you can't tax it. That's what the court case is about. Also, Emily Merle's grandpa, his name is Mr. McCulloch, and he owns a bank, so that's another way I remember it. In Schenck versus the United States, the word shank makes me think of speech, and that case said that you can't protect speech that has a clear and present danger. The First Amendment doesn't protect it. So yeah, shank, I think of speech. For Brown versus Board, that's also another obvious one. It got rid of segregation. Like separate but equal is not equal. For Engel v. Vitale, oh wait, actually Baker versus Carr comes first. In Baker versus Carr, I think of how like a car is like driving around the gerrymandered district, and it has to be based on 1-to-1 for population, and that's by the 14th Amendment. For Engel v. Vitale, I think of I know it's like I already knew that it was the religious case, but you can think of Engel is like angel and think of religion, and then you can remember that it's the Establishment Clause instead of the Free Exercise Clause because E for establishment and E for Engel. The next one's Tinker versus Des Moines Community School District. This is the one with the black armbands, so that one's symbolic speech. If you can't remember that, I guess you could think of, I don't know, just remember. The next one's Gideon versus Wainwright, which we also went over a lot. That's the right to an attorney. Gideon was the guy that was charged with breaking and entering, and he could not defend himself because he was too poor. In Wisconsin versus Yoder, you think of like yodeling and like Amish people, and that's the one where it's free exercise of religion. They had to allow students to leave at age 16 because that's what their religion believed in. And you can remember that one's free exercise instead of the Establishment Clause because like W and Y, like Wisconsin, Yoder, you can think of X in exercise, XYZ. So like free exercise, Yoder, Wisconsin. The next one's New York Times versus United States. You can think of this one because of New York Times makes a lot of papers and like obviously like journalism. This is the one with the Pentagon Papers, and it's about freedom of the press, saying that they couldn't use prior restraint and like not allow, like Nixon wanted to stop the New York Times from using the but from publishing the Pentagon Papers. So just think of the press with New York Times, and that's freedom of the press with the Pentagon Papers. The next one's McDonald versus Chicago. Actually, that one comes later, but never mind. So what I do is I think of like Ronald McDonald with 2 giant bear arms holding guns, because that's the incorporation of the Second Amendment, which is like the right to bear arms, which is incorporated into the states. So just having like that visual in your head can help. Roe v. Wade, everyone knows, is abortion. Like it's protected by the First Amendment. So for Shaw v. Reno, I assimilate the word Reno with race, and I think of like how it's race-based gerrymandering. You can't gerrymander just have like a race congressional district. Also, if you want to think of Shaw like a shawl, like over a congressional district based on Reno, which is race, you know. So for United States versus Lopez, you can either think of George Lopez with a lot of money holding a gun, because it has to do with the Commerce Clause not being able to be applied through the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990. It was like unconstitutional because the Commerce Clause doesn't really have to do with guns. Or if you want, you can think of Lopez, which is an L, which looks like a pistol. So, the next one's Citizens United versus the FEC. This is the one that we learned about that has to do with PACs, and you can't like limit the amount of money that people spend on campaigns because they like say that like money is like speech, like you can't limit it. You can think of citizens and campaigns like C and C. Or you can do like, you can just think of the FEC, which is the Federal Election Campaign. So you can assimilate like it has to do with campaigns and money. Or F, if you just see the F in the FEC, you can think of like finances or what am I thinking of? I don't know. Yeah. So that's like the establishment of super PACs and things like that. So for the foundational documents, for Federalist 10, that talks about the removal of, like, they want, like, obviously factions are bad, that's kind of what they talk about, but then they say that in a large republic, like, it's going to be better because the factions will balance each other, and it's, like, talk about pluralism, and it's, like, emphasizing why a good, like, a big republic would be good. The way that I remember it is Federalist 10 is an even number, and you can think how, like, having two factions balance each other, it'll make it even, having a big republic, even number, balancing of factions. Next one, I don't think we have to know this, but I saw a video and they put in, I'm not sure. Federalist 51, oh wait, it's definitely, yeah, we need to know. Federalist 51 is about separation of powers and checks and balances, and in a big government, you can have branches that are independent of each other, and it's good. The way that I remember this is you take the 1 in Federalist 51, and you put the 5, like you turn the 5 sideways and kind of put it over top of it, and it kind of looks like a balance beam. So you can think of that with like balances. Or if you want, you can think that no one branch won all the power with this 51. So it's basically saying that they're all separated in the power or whatever. Federalist 70 is about the one that's like, you want energy in the executive, single strong, energetic executive will be able to like take quick action, be accountable, and prevent legislative encroachments. So the way that I remember it is like the word 70 starts with an S. You can think 70 single strong executive. The next one's Federalist 78. That has to do with the judicial branch, and they're saying that it's weak, which is good. Like they're like, it's not that weak because it doesn't have power of the purse, which is Congress, or power of the sword, which is like war, which is the executive branch. So like, it's not that strong. Like, don't worry about it. They're not going to be a threat to the states and everything. So the number 78, I think of 7, 8, 9, like that one like joke that everyone used to say, that like 7, 8, 9. And since there's 9 Supreme Court justices, you can like talk about how like Federalist 78 has to do with the Supreme Court and the judicial branch. So like 7, 8, 9. The next one's Brutus 1. This one's going to be easier because there's only one Brutus document. The others are all Federalists. So you can think like Brutus, it's being brutal of the government. They argue that there's going to be too much Federalist government power. Small republics are better, and that factions in the big government will cause gridlock. So it's talking a lot about hyperpluralism. It also says like the elastic and supremacy clauses threaten state power, and the judiciary will infringe on state power. So Brutus 1, brutal against the government. The next one's Declaration of Independence. The rest of these don't really have mnemonic devices or anything like that. It's just like this, like these are the other ones you have to know. Declaration of Independence has to do with like the things you should take away from it are like life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And then also like popular sovereignty and self-government are like big things it emphasizes, and like enlightenment too. So like just like the idea of being self-governed and like a republic. The Articles of Confederation, pretty basic, like just not a lot of huge government power. You could use it like in a essay to like argue how like federal government power ended up being good, or like what changed since the Articles. And then the Constitution, the one way that Mr. Alcaro said was LAJSASR, which stands for lazy, not LALE, lazy elephants jump slowly and sleep regularly, which stands for the like clauses in the Constitution. So lazy is legislative branch. That's the first one, and they talk about it first because it's most important. There's like a lot of stuff about the legislative branch. Elephants is executive. That's the second one. Second most important branch of government. Sorry. Jump is judicial. So lazy elephants jump. Judicial branch. There's not a law on it in the Constitution. Slowly is the next letter, which means state relationships with each other. So it talks about how states have to have like equal opportunities to everyone. Like you can't make someone else who's not a state citizen like have less rights, stuff like that. And is the amendment process. So you need 2/3 of Congress, or I think it's like state legislators, something like that. And then after that you need 3/4. Yeah, it's 2/3 both houses, or 2/3 states at national convention, which is like never happening. And then 3/4 of state legislators, or 3/4 of state conventions. So just think 2/3 house, 3/4 state legislators. The sleep in the word memorization thing is supremacy clause, which is like pretty much the biggest thing in that section, and it's just talking about how the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Regularly is ratification. It talks about how to ratify the Constitution, and it just says that you needed 9 out of the 12 states to ratify it. And then after that is, of course, the Bill of Rights, and then the following amendments. So this is how I remember the amendments. The first one, you should know it: freedom of religion, speech, press, to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government. Just a lot of freedom stuff. The second one is the right to bear arms and a well-regulated militia. If you can't remember that, just think of 2 big bear arms that are holding guns. The third one is that soldiers can't be quartered without consent of the owner. So you can think that 3, you know how people say that 3 is a crowd? You can say that like you don't want a crowd of soldiers in your house. Like you can't have quartered soldiers in houses without the consent of the owner. So for the Fourth Amendment, you can think of the 4 walls of a house, meaning that you're secure in your persons, your houses, your papers, your effects. And that one talks about searches and seizures without warrant. That's like unconstitutional. The Fifth Amendment, you think of like how your 5 fingers and you're like covering your mouth, because it has to do with like you can't have double jeopardy. You can't be a witness against yourself. You have the right to like remain silent. It also covers imprisonment without a trial. The Sixth Amendment, you can think of 5 fingers and 1 finger pointing to a watch, which talks about having a speedy public trial. You can think of that. It's also covering telling why you're accused and like something about witnesses. I don't have it written down. The Seventh Amendment, you could think how 7 is like a lucky number, and you could be wearing like your lucky suit to think of lawsuits. It talks about lawsuits and the right to a trial by jury. The Eighth Amendment, this one's kind of stupid, but you can think of the number 8 looks like it could be like 2 handcuffs on top of each other. And you can think how you can't have excessive bail. And then if you want, you can think how you could have like an $8 million bail, and that's excessive. Or you could have 8 years in prison, which is like cruel and unusual punishment. So it's no excessive bail and fines, and no cruel and unusual punishment. The Ninth Amendment is that people have the rights that aren't specifically listed in the Bill of Rights. If you can't remember this, you can think of like how 9 is like 9, like a German word for no, and you could say that the government can't like prohibit other rights because it's not listed, like you say no. And then the 10th Amendment is that the powers that aren't specifically listed are safe for the states and the people. If you can't remember that for some reason, you could think of like 10 fingers like stopping the government, because it's reserved for the states. It's also like kind of the center of federalism because it's like state power. So then the 11th Amendment, since there's 11 is two ones. I think like 1-to-1, you can't have states like fighting each other. You can't sue states that you don't live in federal courts, or if you don't have business with, like you can't just randomly sue another state if you don't have anything to do with it. The 12th Amendment, you can think of 1-2, meaning that the president and the VP are not first and second place. It's like they come together and you just vote for them together. That changed the Constitution earlier, talking about executives. So that's first and second place for the 12th Amendment. It also has rules about the Electoral College. Okay, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, just like group these together in your head and it'll definitely help. What you can do is think of them each as free citizens can vote. Free citizens can vote. So free is like 3. You can think of 13, which abolished slavery. So that means they're free, and you can associate with 3 and 13. The 14th Amendment is guaranteeing black citizens giving citizenship to African Americans, anyone that's born in the U.S. So it's free citizens. And then 15th is can vote, meaning that you can't stop vote based on race. So free citizens can vote, 13th, 14th, 15th. Also, if you want to think of 14th as like one for all, except like it's a 4 instead of one for all. So it's like all for one, one for all. Everyone has equal protection and due process, which is also a really big, important part of Amendment 14, because it's establishing the incorporation doctrine for the future. So equal protection and due process of the law, but also has to do with African American citizenship. The 16th Amendment, you can think either that like when you're 16 years old, you get a job and you have to start paying taxes. This made income tax, that's what the 16th Amendment did. Or you can think at you're like sweet 16, you get a lot of money. So that also has to do with finances and income tax, you know. The 17th Amendment made the direct election of senators, so you can think 17 starts with SE and it has to do with senators, SE. 18th is prohibition. You could think like at 18 years old, you're an adult, you can do all things except drink. Or you can just think that 18-year-olds drink a lot and party, whatever. So that's prohibition. So it associates it with like alcohol. The 19th Amendment is women's suffrage. I don't have like any kind of mnemonic device for this. If you want, maybe you could think of the 9 and 19 as like a G, saying that you can't stop voting based on gender. The 20th Amendment is about the calendar for the president, and it starts it on January 20th now. So that is like January 20th, 20th Amendment. It just has some like clarifying stuff about the president and specifically the calendar. The 21st Amendment repeals prohibition. You could think 20-year-olds are allowed to drink. 21. The 22nd Amendment has 2 twos in it, and you can think that there's a 2-year term and you're only allowed to be elected 2 times for the president. So 2 terms, 2 times, 22nd Amendment. The 23rd Amendment is that people in DC can vote for the president now. So you can think 23 rhymes with DC. So 23rd Amendment has to do with voting in DC. The 24th Amendment gets rid of the poll tax. This one's kind of hard. You can either think like a rhyme like 2-4, leave the poll tax at the door, or 2-4-6-8 and make like a cheer like 2-4-6-8. What do we hate? Taxes. Poll taxes. Gets rid of poll taxes. The 25th Amendment is succession. You can think of like 25 rhymes with survive, saying that if like a president's sick or dying, it clarifies the vice president and like what's gonna happen if they survive or die. So that's the 25th. Also the 5 and 25th kind of looks like succession, and that's like what it's clarifying. So 25th succession, 25 survive. The 26th is voting at the age of 18. That was like made at the Vietnam War. You can think that 2 + 6 is 8. 18-year-olds can vote. 26th Amendment. The 27th is the last one, and that's saying that Congress can't change their compensation, their pay, without until the next election when the representatives intervene. You can either think of this rhyme that 27 pays, next election raise. So if you want to pay you want to change your pay, you have to wait for next election. Or you can think that since it's like the last amendment, the last thing we want is Congress raising their own pay. So that's another way to think of, like it's the last one, Congress raising their compensation, or you could think 27 pays, next election raise. So that's everything. Hope it helps. It might not. Some of them I don't have anything for just because I remembered it myself, but good luck.